Welcome to another episode of the Talk Show with your host, Jason Takhtadjian. I am here with sports reporter Manouk Akopyan. You know him from his work in the world of boxing. He's with Ring Magazine. He's worked in the past with LA Times. He's done just about everything that you can think of in the world of sports, combat sports, you name it. And he is also my good friend. I have the honor of saying that. Manouk, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thanks a lot for having me on your show. I know you've had a lot of great guests, so an honor to be a part of it.
I want to say thank you to everybody who is watching, but also want to say thank you to you, Manouk, for being on the show and also having that relationship with me that spans years at this point, and also with the connection to sports, man. So, I just want to kind of dive right into it, and I want the folks at home to kind of just learn a little bit about you, how you got into the world of sports, and how you specifically got into boxing as well at a young age.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to journalism school, graduated with a degree there, and my first job out of college was working for Yerevan Magazine, which was a Armenian lifestyle publication. Was the managing editor there for about 4 years. Got to interview a who's who of some of our Armenian icons, from Andre Agassi to Victor Archenyan, Arthur Abraham, Alex Yemenidjian, the right-hand man of Kirk Kerkorian at the time. Just a lot of interesting people, right? And
Yeah.
naturally, with the Armenians in boxing at the time, I got my introduction there as far as covering the sport. Was always a lifelong boxing fan. Grew up watching all the Mike Tyson fights and all of the big fights of the '90s, featuring Oscar De La Hoya,
Hmm.
Vander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, all those guys. And soon enough, I found myself covering the sport and interviewing them and doing all kinds of stories. But you know, Yerevan Magazine was my first start in the media world, and then I went to NFL Network after that. Worked for the league as a writer and reporter and editor, and soon after that worked for the LA Times, covered boxing and MMA there, and now I'm with Ring Magazine. So uh, it's that's the abbreviated 15-year journey per se.
And it's quite the resume, the CV for sure, man. I do want you to take me back though to when you were a child in your childhood, whenever you first got introduced to the sport of boxing and you were watching those fights with Mike Tyson and the legends of the game, really. I mean, did you have a fighter that you specifically gravitated toward, or were you really just gravitating towards the entire sport and not necessarily a specific fighter?
Yeah, it's going back, at the time, it's all the big fights, right? You don't watch the sport from a granular level. When you're a kid, it's whatever dad puts on the TV and invites the family over, and you're watching a fight party, so you're subjected to whatever is put on the TV. But as I got older, I consumed the content on my own terms and just became a hardcore fan of the sport. And I grew up. I'm an '80s baby. Grew up in the '90s when Mike Tyson made his comeback. So naturally, he was a big part of everything that made me a fan. And then, like I said, soon enough, I was interviewing Mike Tyson when I started doing all this professionally. So it's been quite a run. It's been quite a journey.
Do you remember that first interview that you had with Mike Tyson? What that was like, your preparation that you put in beforehand, and just like, oh my God, I'm about to talk to Mike Tyson.
Yeah, of course. I mean, sometimes you have to pinch yourself when you get these opportunities. At the time, it was in 2019, right before he was making his comeback for an exhibition against Roy Jones Jr. This was before COVID, and he invited me over to his offices in El Segundo, known as Tyson Ranch, and he we had a 1 hour sit down, and I asked him everything and anything. Nothing was held back, and it was probably one of my favorite interviews that I've done throughout my career, because he's just so raw and authentic, and you never know what you're going to get once you
Yeah.
open the box that is Mike Tyson. And it was quite the experience, and we built a little bit of relationship afterwards where I got to interview him several times more after. He's very much still active in the media. I'm sure we've all
That's
seen
right.
the appearances, the fights. Uh, he's doing a Broadway show again, so he's very much in the limelight. And it was by far one of my favorite interviews that I did. Ended up doing a cover story for the Los Angeles Times. So real fun stuff.
That's really cool. That's your most memorable interview. Let's just jump right into it, right? Like that's your most memorable interview. How about your most memorable sporting event? And I know you've covered dozens, if not hundreds, of sporting events spanning so many different sports. Maybe it's not just boxing, but just when you think about some of the sporting events that were so memorable to you, what comes to mind?
Yeah, I've covered all kinds of sporting events, all the major sports. And I would say my favorite, most significant one would probably be covering the World Series. And it was actually, when the Boston Red Sox beat the Los Angeles Dodgers, it was a little bit of a weird one for me because I'm a lifelong Dodgers fan, but had to cover the World Series. The Red Sox won that year in 2018, and obviously I'm approaching things as a journalist and reporter and taking things objectively. And I was there for Game Five when the Boston Red Sox beat the Dodgers, clinched on the home field, and that was quite the experience. Just being in the whole celebratory ambiance of things. As far as
Yeah,
boxing, I would probably have to go with kind of some recency bias with the Canelo Alvarez Terrence Crawford fight
that's
in Las
right.
Vegas. That was a stadium fight, 75,000 people, great, two of the best fighters of the generation, and it was just a great experience throughout the entire fight week leading up to the fight. So, but yeah, I've covered hundreds of boxing and UFC fights from ringside, so it's always hard to pick one.
Right, of course. I want to really quickly go back to that World Series. Do you remember covering Game 5 and finishing up in the media room and having to go back into the city? And do you remember what Boston was like after they won that World Series?
Yeah, well, actually, Boston won in Los Angeles, so I
Okay.
I I drove back home.
Oh, okay.
I
So you ended up going driving back
Yeah,
home.
I
Okay.
drove back home 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
yeah, as
Yeah.
it goes into the wee hours of the night, especially on a night like that when they're clinching the title. And yeah, it was quite surreal. I had to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning because I had to do some news hits for some
Wow.
TV stations, and it was quite the experience.
Wow, that is really neat, and that's my mistake for thinking that it was in Boston rather than LA. That's a silly mistake right there. So
Yeah, LA
sorry
can't
about
have
that.
anything nice, but they've turned things around. They've
Yeah,
won three out of the last five.
that's right. If you're a Dodger fan, you're on cloud nine. We have a photog here at our station. His name is Kevin Mahan. I've had him on this show before. He's the biggest Dodger fan I know, and to this day, he's like, "Oh, by the way, did you know the Dodgers won the World Series?" He just always says it. For me, I don't mind at all. I don't mind at all. There's some Giants fans though here, so you could see how it battles
Right,
between them.
right.
So speaking of these events, man, you have been around longer than I have, longer than most Armenian journalists when it comes to the world of sports. And you have had hundreds of sporting events that you've covered and even more that you've experienced in your life watching as a fan. But when you take into account the history of boxing, combat sports in general, is there a fight that if you had a time machine, you'd love to just kind of go back to either cover or just experience as a fan?
Yeah, probably one of Muhammad Ali's fights, I would say. It's and they're synonymous with catchphrases, right? The Thrilla in Manila, the Rumble in the Jungle. So,
Yes.
either one of those two fights would be a treat just to go back into the golden age
Mhm.
of the sport and to cover, a fight in the Philippines or Africa. It's quite the experience, I would say it would have been.
Yeah, especially I think that's a perfect choice, right? One of those Muhammad Ali fights for me, like Rumble in the Jungle, just the way that that was marketed, the way that that fight just like feels like the aura of that fight as someone who is still trying to learn more and more about boxing, learning about that fight, it really feels like a true spectacle rather than just, a boxing match between two people. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's I would definitely say it would be a privilege to cover any of Muhammad Ali's fights, but those two specifically would top the list.
there you go. Speaking of, eras and generations of boxing, I mean, when you look at the current landscape of boxing, you just recently covered what you said, one of your favorite events to cover, period, in boxing, Bud Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez. Um, what does the state of boxing right now look like when it comes to star power, the popularity that the sport has right now? Do you think it's in an upward trajectory right now, or where do you see the sport?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's going in an upward trajectory just because we're seeing a lot more of the fights that we want to see. They are being made. I mean, years ago, even discussing a fight with Canelo Alvarez and Bud Crawford would have been, oh, that's fantasy land. So we're definitely getting a lot more of the fights that we do want to see. And a lot of the fighters, the young and up and coming fighters, are fighting each other. So I think a lot the protecting the O, as they say, you're seeing that less and less. And over the last 2 years, we've had some great fights with the best facing the best. Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk, Dmitry Bivol versus Arthur Beterbiev, and that's just on the very short list. That there's been so many great fights where, uh, due to boxing's fractured infrastructure, a lot of the times would not be made, but nowadays they are. And 2026 is looking like it's going to be another year in that direction. Hopefully, we get that Tyson Fury Anthony Joshua fight. We're already getting Teofimo Lopez versus Shakur Stevenson.
Oh, that's
So there's a lot of great fights to look forward to.
absolutely, man. You really have paint the picture that boxing is changing, and for maybe the casual fan, that's something that they need to really catch up on and understand that promoters aren't necessarily getting in the way like they used to. We are getting those fights that the fans do want, and that's been one of the biggest criticisms of boxing that also has been compared to the UFC, right? Because UFC tries to promote and put these fights together that the fans want. But I do want to touch on a subject with you that I know that you have covered and you have talked about too, and that is influencer boxing and YouTube boxing. I want to kind of get your overall feeling on, what it was like covering or just seeing it in the rise and the early forms of it. Maybe let's say that was what, 7, 8 years ago compared to now. Are you on board with it at all? Do you see the value in it? What's your opinions on it?
Yeah, I think influencer boxing goes back to celebrity boxing, right? Which was back in the day, it used to be this entirely niche market that it's like a car crash you can't avoid. You're watching it as you go by. But over the last few years, we have seen an increase led by Jake Paul. He's done a great job for himself and putting the sport in uh, a position where it is seen by different audiences. However, the term influencer boxing that I don't like is that when random Joe TikTok creator down the street all of a sudden picks up a pair of gloves and wants you to get excited about his fight. That's the ones that I don't agree with. The people who are trying to replicate some kind of rubric that Jake Paul has set for himself. But Jake Paul is living, breathing, and eating boxing over the last 6 years and is dedicating himself in the sport. And, whatever criticisms you have of him about, the caliber of competition he's facing or at what stage of their careers he's facing them at, they're generally on the older side and past their prime.
Hmm.
Now he's fighting Anthony Joshua, which is the two-time former heavyweight champion of the world, who is very much still a destroyer. And he's looking to essentially get rid of Paul to move on to bigger and better things. This is not his last paycheck. And a lot of people are confused why Paul would put himself in this position to lose a fight and lose the luster that he's built and have
Mhm.
to start all over again. And after he's humbled, so it's going to be quite the scene December 19 when they meet.
Yeah, I would say there aren't that many influencer boxers you can think of that have taken it this serious, other than Jake Paul. There maybe it could have been one or two other guys. I know there's a British boxer. His name's KSI, who was a YouTuber as well, helped start Misfits Boxing. But that kind of plays into what you were talking about, where it's just a random TikToker who nobody knows except for maybe his few thousand followers, and that's what they're trying to sell the tickets, and that's what how they're trying to sell those pay-per-views and stuff. And I'm not necessarily on board with that. Jake Paul, I do agree, is a little bit different because he has been doing nothing but boxing and he actually is trying to take this seriously. And I can remember him even being on ESPN and other actual sporting broadcast channels talking about the sport of boxing. I think there's still some people on social media that are very stuck with thinking of Jake Paul as a TikToker or the kid from Disney Channel. And now, yeah, like you said, he's in a fight with Anthony Joshua, and I don't think it ends well for Jake, honestly.
Yeah, I don't see. It's an 8 round fight. I don't see him, you know, getting past two or three. I mean, it all depends on how quickly Anthony Joshua wants to get him out of there. So, but we'll be tuning in. It's on Netflix. Gonna everyone from around the world's gonna be watching, I'm sure.
That's true. I guess then, it kind of goes back to the original point of like that influencer boxing or this prize fighting. Um, you do see though more fans gravitating towards like professional side of boxing because of this? Do you see that sort of correlation?
Well, it all comes down to how good the product is, right?
Mm,
It, you have to have a good product. You need to have well-made fights. You need to have significant fights that tell stories. Fight. It's all about ability and also marketability.
yeah.
And Jake Paul is trying to catch up on the ability side and put himself in a position to do more of these things. But at the end of the day, if you're watching the sloppy product that is not entertaining, you're not going to tune in the next time. So that's all it comes down to. You could you could sell the world, but if you're not going to back it up, it has no weight.
There you go, man. I would be remiss if we only talked about boxing. I know that's not the only sport that you specialize in. You actually specialize in just about every other sport that I can think of. And staying with combat sports, the world of MMA continues to grow. And I know this has been a topic that we've been meaning to talk about, especially when it comes to Arman Tsarukyan. And we all know weeks ago he won against Dan Hooker with a very impressive submission win in Qatar. But it still remains to be seen when and if Arman's going to fight in the UFC next, if that's happening sometime in 2026. We've already had a BMF title fight announced. We've had an interim lightweight title fight announced. Arman's not part of any of those. I wanted to ask you just kind of your overall, whenever you look at the situation, what do you see? What do you think is in the cards for Arman's future?
Yeah, unfortunately, Arman's not holding the cards, right? Because everything that has happened over the last few weeks has gone against him. Paddy Pimblett versus Justin Gagey for the interim title means that Arman's going to have to wait in line again once Ilya Taporia is back in the picture because the interim title holder is going to challenge Ilya at that point. So uh, everyone was assuming Arman would be aligned to fight Max Holloway, the BMF champion, but Charles Oliveira, the guy he beat,
Hmm.
ended up getting that opportunity. That one is set for March. So the first half of the year for Arman, he either sits on the sidelines again and waits for the entire picture to unfold, or there could be a fight like Benoit Saint Denis in Paris, and I think that could be a big fight for him. But I think the soonest he could get a title shot is probably the end of next year if Taporia ends up beating whoever the winner is of that fight. A lot of movable parts, right?
That's true.
He could very well end up facing the winner of Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira for the BMF title and then fight Ilya. So right now, the UFC lightweight picture, UFC has to also manage their legends and their fading stars, and they got three of them in the division, and they got three up and comers. I can't even call them up and comers anymore. Three guys that are right there,
Yeah.
and probably would be favorites to beat any of the Gages, Holloways, and Oliveras of the world.
Yeah, I think just the fact that the lightweight division in the UFC right now is just so stacked. It's just working against Arman, and although he's made weight now twice, back to back for the backup fight and for the fight against Dan Hooker, I still think that there's a little bit more work that needs to be done as far as getting Arman in UFC's good graces. That Benoit Saint Denis idea of a fight has been floated by this MMA coach, is a friend of mine in Vegas, Gokor Ambarian, and I really like that idea of him fighting Benoit Saint Denis. I understand people who think, oh, Arman shouldn't even fight; he should wait for the title. But I don't want to go another year and a half not seeing Arman fight. I want to see him active. I remember you and I being in LA trying to cover UFC 311 and the stress that just ensued once he got ruled out of the fight. And after that, it had been so long since he had fought that now I'm almost approaching 2 years in Fresno, and now he finally gets to fighting Dan Hooker. So it's just a matter of waiting, and I think that Saint Denis fight would be pretty interesting and fun to watch too, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a big fight for Europe. He's obviously uh, ethnic Armenian,
Mhm.
brings all of Russia with him too. Uh, Benoit Saint Denis is French, a lot of French, a lot of Armenian population in France. I think that's a big
Yes.
fight in France, and the UFC obviously goes there on an annual basis, and they could be well served to make that fight there. And I think at the end of the day, it's an opportunity for Armand to get another big name under his belt
Yeah.
while staying active, because um, the only activity he's getting are these grappling matches, which is a good way to break some sweat and make an extra dollar. But at the end of the day, it's not going to add to his UFC legacy.
That's true. I think Arman has a grappling match coming up in Armenia end of December. And outside of that, not too sure what else is coming up. Maybe he's waiting for the new year to come by. But at the same time, I think you and I are on board. We want to see him fight. And that I wasn't even thinking about him fighting Saint Denis in Paris because that I think is enough to be a main event.
Oh, absolutely. And at this point, Arman Tsarukyan is a main event fighter,
Yeah,
unless he's going to be on a Alex Pereira undercard or a Conor McGregor, John Jones undercard. If they want to stack a fight that way, at this point, Arman Tsarukyan is a main event fighter. He has a big fan base. He has a big following on social media. I think he's a polarizing figure as well too, because you either love him or hate him with everything that goes around him. He obviously headbutted Dan Hooker. A lot of people didn't like that. He, uh, UFC 300, he got into that altercation with the fan,
that's
the
right.
whole 311 saga with the pulling out on the day of the weigh-in. So a lot of people have opinions of him, whether they are good or bad, and that's usually a good thing. You either want to be loved or hated, because usually the people buying tickets or tuning in will do to watch you lose as well too, and that in itself is good business.
Yeah, I definitely feel like Arman Tsarukyan is becoming a star and a polarizing star because of that. I think the UFC, as long as he fights more in the UFC and the UFC gives him more exposure, he's only going to attract more attention. Whether it's the good attention as far as the fans or people who don't like Arman Tsarukyan, but to the UFC, I think it's a win-win.
Yeah, and he's really building this persona and personality, right? I
Mhm.
mean, we see all the Instagram videos, and he's building quite a character. And from the outside looking in, uh, Armand is considered a nepo baby and someone who was born on third base. But away from the cameras, I've gotten a chance to meet with him quite a few times already during his time in Los Angeles. Interviewed him several times, and away from the cameras, he's different than the persona he portrays on social media.
I agree. I was gonna mention I haven't met Arman Tsarukyan in person personally. I've only met him like while covering like UFC 300 or 311, and that I don't really count. But I've heard from people like you and from other folks who are either friends of Arman or train with him that he is a humble guy and that he's a really quiet to himself type of guy that, just wants to have fun, wants to have a good time, but just wants to also live his life in peace. And I totally get that and understand that. Um, I just when I think of Arman Sarukian and whatever he posts on Instagram, I think of In and Out or McDonald's or whatever those food. He knows how to get attention. That food is always going to get attention on social media.
Absolutely. And and it goes back to what I said earlier. It's the marketability paired with the ability. And he definitely has the ability. And now he's just building a brand for himself. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a cooking show lined up pretty soon.
Maybe a cooking show, maybe who knows? I don't know if he would do like a food tasting show. Maybe he's not too much out there, but I like that. I liked him diving into the world of the culinary world. I like that for sure. But diving into different worlds, Manuk, you have extensive history also covering Armenian sports, and you were play-by-play commentator past 3 years for Armenia basketball when they come to LA. That's really cool. I think that's such a cool experience to be able to do play by play, but also do it for your country. I've had the opportunity to do play by play for Armenia basketball once here in Fresno. But you and Zando, you guys are the main guys when it comes to the LA broadcasts. Talk to me just about how cool that is to be able to do journalistic work, do that sort of work in the world of sports, but also tie that to the Armenian community and in a way giving back to the Armenian community and doing that.
Yeah, it kind of came full circle for me, right? Because as I mentioned, I got my start at Yerevan magazine. I was covering all the Armenian athletes. The very first interview and story that I did for Yerevan magazine was with Jerry Tarkanian, a guy I'm sure you know
Yes.
very well. And for me, it kind of was a full circle moment when I started broadcasting the Armenian basketball games because I had a relationship with Rex Kalamian at that point. I had interviewed him during Armenian Heritage Night games when he was an assistant coach with the Clippers. So our relationship went back even prior to when he took the head coaching job with Team Armenia a few years ago. And it's been great to see what he's building with the program, uh, bringing some of that NBA flavor to Team Armenia and really uh, ushering the next generation of Armenian basketball because there's a lot of Armenian Americans who are at this point were born and bred in the United States and they have the facilities and the capabilities to make a name for themselves in the basketball circuit. And I think Rex has a big pool of talent to pick from, and it's been a privilege to be so close to the program, to call the games. When they came a few years back, it was a doubleheader against France, and then we've seen games against Guatemala, Ireland, Costa Rica. It's been quite the journey in such a short order of time, and I think we've seen the progress as well too.
Absolutely. The progress has been awesome to see just, from just about nothing to now we see Armenia competing and you have the NBA influence and backing and, Giannis Antetokounmpo is watching Armenian basketball games with Rex Kalamian. I mean, it's so cool to just see all that kind of come together. And it's also so cool to hear that, your relationship with Armenian basketball with Rex Kalamian and with so many people in Armenian sports just spans, so much time and those relationships I think are very important when it comes to doing this sort of storytelling and journalism. So, I commend you for your work, and you honestly are somebody that, if any Armenian is in Armenian sports or even in journalism, you're somebody to look up to. So, that's really awesome,
I
man.
appreciate the kind words, Jason.
Absolutely, Manuk. And unfortunately, we are running up on time already. It's already been half an hour. I wish I could talk to you more, and we definitely have a lot more to catch up on. But is there anything else you want to leave the audience on, or maybe just a sporting event that you're looking forward to either cover or watch, or what do you got going on?
Yeah, I think the sporting events I'm looking forward to is the World Cup at this point, right? It's coming
Yes.
it's coming to the United States, coming to Los Angeles. I'm sure we'll reconnect by then for more conversations. The Olympics are coming to LA. There's a lot of great stuff happening. But my beat at the moment, it's boxing, and 2026 is shaping up to be another big year. And I would say whoever's interested in the sport can follow along. Read my work at ringmagazine.com. Follow me on social media, where I post my content and interviews and stories. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of the great things you're going to be doing as well too with the show, Jason. Congratulations, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Manouk. Have a great one, man.
Thank you.